we have had two different examples of how the sector, being the national federation, can try to help in creating local employment. So now the floor is yours. I would like to propose 20 minutes question and answer session, because what we have to really, there is one constraint we have today, is that we have to have everything finished at 5:30 so that the minister can come and deliver the closing speech. So everything is tied to that time limit, and which is good anyway, because it helps us also to be more efficient. But that's why I'd like to have only 20 minutes question and answer if possible now. And I open the floor. Arnaud, you want to get a more precision maybe?
Merci Laurent pour ta question. Can I just ask one follow-up question to the energy efficient refurbishment of your stock? Because 100,000 units per annum, that's quite an ambitious target, which is to be applauded. But just thinking about the means to finance, if you say 15,000 euros a unit times 100,000 is 1.5 billion euros a year. At a co-financing rate of 50%, that means 750,000 euros out of ERDF. Is, as part of your contract with the government, there a clause in there that commits that funding to the social housing sector in that order? Because otherwise I think it might be quite difficult for your sector to find the finance to deliver the retrofitting agenda, which is very, very ambitious. Thank you.
Well, yes, indeed, it is a very ambitious goal, but which was already partly covered, because in the past we commit ourselves to retrofit 800,000 units, and we can benefit from very different aids, which, if you add them all, amount to quite a substantial amount. There are many state aids, premiums. There is the eco loan from the Caisse des Dépôts, which covers most of the expenses at a pretty low interest rate, much lower than the market interest rate. Then we can get also grants from municipalities, from regions, and there are also many provisions that enable landlords to avoid taxes. For instance, there is a tax reduction that is calculated on the basis of the amount invested in retrofitting, and that is quite an interesting provision for us. There is another provision whereby you can make part of the retrofitting expense paid by your tenants, and so the landlord can get part of its own investment from the rents that are paid by the tenants. So if you look at the various retrofitting projects that already exist, and if you add up all the existing grants, premiums and what have you, you already cover quite a huge part of the amount that is necessary. And if you add to this the ERDF grants, we are not far from 80% of the total expense that is covered. So it is a state priority, actually, which was decided as part of a big national conference on the future green economy. And of course, there are different types of aids, subsidies, grants that are available. It takes a bit of time for you to go canvassing all the organizations to get all those grants and subsidies. But we all are faced with a reduction on our own equities, so we cannot continue to dip into our reserves and to dip into our equities. We have taken most of the available ERDF amounts, and so we had to look for something different. That is the reason why we are negotiating the operational programs for the next ERDF period. And the aim is not to have a maximum of 4%, but a minimum of 20% in retrofitting for all sectors. And what comes out from the negotiations we have already engaged with our regional partners is that clearly regions want to foster retrofitting. So of course the amounts are quite big, quantitatively speaking, but I don't suspect we will have so much problems to reaching our goals in retrofitting. We might have much more problem in the construction strand because of the scarcity of available land or the skyrocketing prices of land in some areas, and I suspect it will be much more difficult to achieve those construction goals than the energy renovation goals.
Any other question?
Yes, hi, my name is Barbara Steenberg. I'm the representative of the tenants today. And I have a question to Laurent Ghekiere. In your presentation, you said part of the social housing pact, the new social housing pact in France, it is also the preventing of evictions of tenants. And actually, perhaps this is more, let's say, a rhetoric question, but don't you think as a social housing sector that you shouldn't evict at all tenants and not talk about preventing it?
Bonne question venant d'une association de locataires. Bon, je vais répondre avec beaucoup de prudence. Non, alors c'est vrai que...
Well, that's an excellent question, especially from a tenants association. Of course, when you are in the social housing sector and when you say you are trying not to evict people, it might seem contradictory, but we are landlords, we have leases, and when the terms of the leases are not fulfilled, when the terms of the contract are not fulfilled, in principle, you evict. And the added value of a social housing provider is that it has a prevention strategy to avoid tenants defaulting. There is also a kind of support that is provided to tenants that face financial difficulties, and one can look for alternatives. For instance, one could activate a special fund that will help tenants pay for their rents, at least for a certain period of time, or propose a cheaper accommodation. But what is to be mentioned here is that the social housing system in France is based on aid to investment, aid to people, i.e., in fact, this is a means-tested benefit. So each of our tenants gets a benefit that is calculated on his or her income. And in the past, this means-tested benefit was devised for people which had low but regular income. Nowadays, we are faced with a population without any income or with very low income. And in any case, a tenant will have to pay part of the rent. Even if it's a very small part, there will always be a part to be paid by the tenant. But sometimes even that very small amount is still too big for some tenants. And that is the reason why sometimes eviction procedures have to be taken for defaulting tenants. That is the economic reality, or because the tenant is of bad faith. One of the goals that we set ourselves, and that is confirmed in the pact, is that we intend to develop many more supportive measures to avoid tenants ending in that kind of eviction procedure, because we see this as our role as social landlords. And we think that, more importantly, the means-tested benefit scheme, which I referred to previously, should be revisited in order to accommodate a new environment and a new economic context, so that people can always afford their rent. It seems that given the current circumstances, this revisiting of the scheme is unavoidable. And we know that more and more people are facing economic difficulties, so the number of potential evictions is on the increase, unfortunately. So it might seem contradictory for a social landlord to evict people, but let's not forget that we are landlord in the first place, and social
Any other comments
also, but
questions?
in the second place.
Otherwise, I would just have one, because I think what is common to the two presentations is the fact that indeed it's a pact or a partnership, but in each time it's not a real contract. So I was wondering from the two speakers if you can tell a little bit more about what what is happening when the partnerships is not really fulfilled. Like you were saying that you really have to put a lot of resources, but indeed you didn't say so much if there is really a lot of cases where you just cannot do many things with the contractors. And for you, Laurent, what will happen when you will have delivered not a quarter of what you are supposed to deliver?
Yeah. There are several examples of projects not ending in great results, but I would not put it on the contractor themselves. It can also be the social housing organization that cannot manage to keep a focus all the way through the construction project. So I have actually not found any construction companies who would not participate in a partnership like this. So in cases they do not succeed, I will not put it on the construction companies alone. Yeah.
Fair enough. An answer. Laurent?
On n'est pas dans un contrat formel.
We are not into a formal contract. This is a pact. This is an agreement where we give means in exchange for objectives that have to be met. And the pact is between two entities on an equal footing, of course. Now, at the same time, there is a political dimension when it comes to signing the agreement. It is a multi-annual agreement with clear objectives in a period of housing and budget crisis. But it is also a risk that we take when we realize that we are not going to reach the objectives that we have set. And when we notice that the housing organizations are not up to expectations and that they do not have the means to reach the objectives, and that perhaps we should open up the pact to other stakeholders. But this is a risk that we know since the beginning. In every contract, in every ambitious challenge, there are external factors that come in. If at the same time we do not have a proper land policy on the side of the state and the municipalities, if, for example, a part of land is not made free, well, we won't be able to apply to the offer. We are the only decision makers in a way once we get the funding, but if we are not able to mobilize an offer, or if the building permit is rejected for a certain reason, well, at that moment there are objective constraints that will make it difficult to reach the objectives. But this is a risk that we need to take into account, that we need to manage. Everyone knows that it is complex and that, well, we won't be able to reach these objectives from one day to the other.
Je voudrais compléter ce que vient de dire Laurent.
Yes, coming back to what Laurent has said, in a pact, in a contract, there are two parties. So the two parties have to meet their objectives, including the state. And I have the feeling that, well, the state is having a hard time in finalizing some objectives. We also mentioned personal housing aid, and once again, well, the state aid have not been enhanced. So it means that the social issue will be made even more serious. I think that when it comes to equities, we will be able to gain equities and to use them for different purposes. And we might risk a decrease in production this year again.
Precise elements indeed. Rikke, you wanted to maybe give the final word on this.
Okay, I just wanted to elaborate a bit, because as I started off by saying, we have right now quite a strong voice. That means that the companies really want to do what we want to do. And that's positive, but we also experience that maybe they want to do everything in the beginning and maybe not when we reach the end. So that's why, as I said before, I think the responsibility is on both sides, both the landlord and the builder and the construction company. But that's why we at all times try to push the limits of what is voluntary, because it's voluntary for, well, overall, but we really encourage everyone to commit to a project, a well-defined project with success criteria and so on. So it's not just a handshake, but a very concrete project with very specific results.
Natalia, one.
Laurent, this is for you. Before you said that you are landlords first and social second, and talking about eviction strategies. Maybe turning it around, being social first and landlord second, so setting the two equal, not talking about 1 and 2, inspired by what we heard this morning also. Maybe that would be the best eviction strategy or prevention strategy. And maybe it would also make it easier for you to be a landlord.
Non, effectivement, c'est une...
Well, it is a true issue. It is about maintaining a balance between the two functions, between the two roles. Of course, we could avoid having any strategy. We could accept defaulting tenants and have social housing habitats without any funding. Then the flats will no longer be maintained properly. So it is a matter of balance and of compatibility with private aid. The role of a landlord is not about evicting defaulting tenants, but when we no longer have the choice, well, we have to do it. If we have a good balance between management and new housing production, we need to act in terms of prevention, and one of the objectives of the pact is to strengthen the social mission of low-cost housing, to make sure that, well, the landlord does not limit himself to sending an invoice to a tenant, but rather accompanies the person in a social inclusion approach, in making sure that these tenants can have access to financial aids. But this is very costly, this is very expensive when it comes to staff. We cannot satisfy ourselves with investment funds. We also need other types of funds, and it changes the competences of the landlord. So far, we have been calling upon specialized associations with whom we sign contracts. We could envisage internalizing these functions and having a more sophisticated internal approach. But this is an evolution of our profession as a social landlord, and it meets perhaps the expectations that society has got towards us. And it also means that we are now focusing on more vulnerable populations that have a harder time paying their rent.
So that we can really come back to the final session, looking at the practice of the national federations to help members implementing CSR or responsible housing strategies in their own membership.